you're Marvel in the 90s, and you really need to make a brand new Spider-Man show because you just canceled the previous one, which had run for about 6 seasons, and was critically acclaimed and as well considered one of the, if not the best, Spider-Man show ever created. So how do you follow that up? Obviously, you need to fulfill the contractual obligations of continuing to have Spider-Man shows and airing them on Fox Kids because the money is amazing, but you've just been informed that because there's a Spider-Man movie in the works, you're not allowed to use a majority of Spider-Man's characters for this Spider-Man TV show. So what do? It's simple, you put Spider-Man in an unfamiliar place with new characters that have familiar traits and familiar faces, and you set it on Counter-Earth. You know, the place from Guardians of the Galaxy where Earth is primarily run by half animal, half people bipedal things that roam all over, with their creator slash god being the High Evolutionary himself. The show chose to do this, and the best way I can really describe this show is as though you decided to start reading a Spider-Man run, but instead of issue 1 of whatever this new run of Spider-Man is, you started on issue 45. And it just so happens on issue 45, they were trying something radically different. And that's how I feel like we got to Spider-Man Unlimited. I want to make this very clear. I love this show. I think it's wacky, I think it's zany, I think it fits the comic book aesthetic of these characters very well, but it definitely is weird, and I can see why it didn't catch on with general audiences. And that's because the show was set up to fail. And even though it was set up to fail, it still produced a show that understood Spider-Man. Now, Spider-Man Unlimited starts really well as just a regular Spider-Man show. I think the suit design for Peter was amazing. I've always been partial to like those sort of orangish yellow lenses. I love them. As well, we get to see his recurring characters like J. Jonah Jameson. We're introduced to JJ's son, who is an astronaut, and he's off to space to go visit Counter-Earth. And the entire premise of the opening episode is that Spider-Man has to stop the 2 symbiotes, Venom and Carnage, who are already established in the show, from hijacking the spacecraft there. And it doesn't go very well. But before we get to that, I do also want to mention, like, this show, as I said earlier, is weirdly connected to the 90s show. And we see that in the first episode where they use a riff from the 90s show specifically that doesn't get used again throughout the rest of the series. If you're on YouTube, I don't know if they'll let me play it for you, but you probably know what I'm talking about. The show was originally only created because they needed to fulfill another Spider-Man show on contract and didn't want to continue the 90s show, whether it was for price, declining toy sales, or some other reason that is undisclosed to us, unfortunately. And of course, they needed to continue to make Spider-Man shows. And the idea at first was to just do a very, very low budget of The Amazing Spider-Man, adaptations of the early issues of the comic books. That was the goal initially. But if you would also know, this being 1999, we're looking at a new adaptation of Spider-Man potentially coming into film. And because of this, they pulled a Batman embargo and said that you can't use the classic Spider-Man look, you can't use any of his supporting characters, any of his side characters, or anything. You have to give us a new Spider-Man show that has nothing to do with modern day Spider-Man, whether it was past or present. It has to be something brand new because the live action film is going to come out. So they had to come up with an idea. They started with the idea of maybe doing a Spider-Man 2099 show, which I think would have been so awesome. I mean, comment down below if you think you would have enjoyed a Spider-Man 2099 show in the 90s. I would have loved to have seen that, even though obviously I wasn't born in the 90s. I do watch all these shows, so I would have been hyped. But unfortunately, they decided to go with this version. And even though I say unfortunately, it's not because this version is bad. I find it enjoyable, and I think that working within the limitations of what they had to do to create the show and make it the way it is, I think they did a wonderful job. And that was just a little background in history. So there you guys go. Oh, and you want to hear something even crazier? They were making the show up writing-wise as they were producing it. So they were just throwing shit at the wall to see what stuck. And surprisingly, a decent amount of it stuck. For the first half of the first episode, it's like your very traditional Spider-Man show. Spidey has been framed for the murder of John Jameson because he hasn't reported back from Counter-Earth. He is currently being subject to everybody treating him like shit. Usual Spider-Man stuff. He's having a conflict of whether or not he should be Spider-Man, and I think the show actually does have a very good understanding of the character. When I originally went to come look at this show and talk about it, I originally was going to come in very negatively. What's Spider-Man doing on Counter-Earth? Why was this chosen? This is dumb. Spider-Man is characterized wrong. These are all just the things that I remembered from when I was a kid. But upon watching the show, they got the character of Spider-Man down to a T. So as far as adaptations go, they did a very, very good job at adapting Spider-Man and the general struggles he tends to face on a day-to-day basis.
There are lots of people who fight the good fight without it turning into a costumed slugfest. Peter Parker could be as important to the world as Spider-Man ever was.
We see that Peter has a lot of inner turmoil over the fact that he unfortunately lost John Jameson and believes him to be dead. He blames himself. So when he sees John Jameson is alive, he does resolute to continue being Spider-Man, but to save John Jameson and to take a little break from actually being the webhead for a little bit, as everybody thinks he's dead already. So he gets a job working at the facility that's trying to send a follow-up shuttle to save Jameson. And during that time, he also builds himself a brand new suit. One of my favorite original Spider-Man suits ever. I always thought this suit looked so dope as a kid, and I really wish there were like a good 1/6 scale figure of it somewhere that I could get my hands on, because it's so awesome and it's non-traditional. It makes sense and fits throughout the style and tone of this show with how this Spider-Man acts and where the Spider-Man's gonna be, especially on Counter-Earth. I really, really liked this. I also liked how they expanded on the universe with characters like Nick Fury appearing, even if he will only appear in this episode and the rest will take place on Counter-Earth. And this is when things start to radically change a lot. We see that Peter is now on an Earth that is similar but different. We have to see that he has to deal with foes that aren't exactly human, and he has to deal with the High Evolutionary. That's not traditionally a Spider-Man villain, but I can see why they were trying to do something like this. You're coming off of the heels of a show that was nothing more than classic Spider-Man. We got a lot of the Marvel Universe and a lot of cool tidbits, but at the end of the day, it was classic Spider-Man and adapting stories that we have seen before, and some fresh. This was a chance to give Spider-Man a brand new story, a brand new look, mostly probably for toys, along with all these new characters. I can only imagine how much of this was subject to, helping with the toy movement. But ultimately, this was reinventing Spider-Man in a new and bizarre way. But I think it worked really well. Despite Peter being on Counter-Earth and despite majority of his supporting cast being gone, I felt this show did a good job of building a new supporting cast, whether that was in leagues of villains, additional heroes, and antagonists that weren't necessarily villains but weren't heroes in their own right. And I thought they did a pretty good job of this. I thought they did a great job of introducing the High Evolutionary, showing us why he came to this planet, why he experimented on animals, and why he is doing what he is doing. I think it was a great setup for this entire new universe. And in 1 or 2 episodes, they really got it down packed as to what we should expect from the rest of this show. Granted, I can see why people were confused and really bewildered by the fact that this was the new Spider-Man show, because it doesn't have a lot to do with Spider-Man and his mythos, but is rather building up an entirely new brand. They went to do something radically different, and it didn't work, at least to general audiences. But as I come back and look at this show in a vacuum, and even outside of a vacuum comparing it to the 90s show, well, it is the weird middle child between the 90s show and shows like Spectacular. It's still good in its own right, and it still understands Spider-Man very well, giving him a supporting cast that is new and fresh, but still plays off his dynamics well, and still giving us some of his best classic villains like Venom and Carnage, who have an entire plot to turn the entire world of Counter-Earth into symbiote slaves. Yeah, like one giant hive mind. It's kind of wild and really disturbing. And I've been mentioning these side characters, so it's about time I actually bring up their names. Those Resistance members being Daniel Bromy, he's the explosive expert, and also Ozzy. Is there like a correlation there? We have Jet Hoskins, who also is a set of literal living bandages, experimented on by Sir Ram. He's the dude with the ram horns you've probably seen earlier in this episode. We of course have John Jameson, but then we have Karen O'Malley, who is right hand to John Jameson and closest to him as John Jameson is leading the Resistance. But she's also the granddaughter of the High Evolutionary, which is crazy. He experimented on her as a baby, and that's really some sick shit, man. And then of course, Spider-Man himself, unofficial member, obviously. But it is amazing to see that, like, this is a cast of characters they put together and did a somewhat, listen, I am not holding this show to the standards of Spectacular. I'm not gonna hold it to the standards of like X-Men Evolution. I'm holding it to the standards of other 90s shows. And in my opinion, when it comes to the other 90s shows, it did a very good job of establishing these brand new characters and giving them each an episode of their backgrounds. It's not nearly as good as the 90s Spider-Man show, but I would say it's right on par with 90s Iron Man. And I think 90s Iron Man is pretty good. And since I mentioned Sir Ram, I also want to go into depth about the villains. This show has a great understanding of Eddie Brock as Venom, in my opinion, and the relationship that he has with Peter, but it ultimately fails the symbiote in multiple ways. And I'll get down to that later, as there's an episode dedicated to it that I want to quickly go over near like the second third of the video. Depends on how the editing process for this looks. Trying some new things here, guys. But either way, Carnage is spot on. I mean, he's just a crazy homicidal maniac, and they tone him down a little bit for a kid's show. Not as good as the 90s, but still classic Carnage charm, if you could call it charm. But it's really the new villains under the High Evolutionary, the Knights of Wodegar? I have it written down here. I don't no idea how to pronounce it. The internet did not help me pronounce it. But that happens to have Sir Ram, as I mentioned earlier, the scientist. We have Lord Tiger, he's like the noble leader. Then we of course have Lady Vermin, the infiltrator, who is also the stand-in for Black Cat, and her and Spider-Man flirt throughout the show in a very funny way because she is part rat, and Spidey is so grossed out by it. And then of course we have Lady Ursula, the muscle bear. I didn't think I had to explain Sir Ram and Tiger though, because like, I mean, come on, it's in the name. We're also introduced to Yamada Jones, who has a son called Shane, and this character is going to stand in for Peter's somewhat MJ. MJ is mentioned a ton in the show, but she only appears in that very first episode. Yamada Jones is who took Peter in, helped him heal his hands after he destroyed one of the somewhat sentinel-looking bots that our grand overlord, the High Evolutionary, has left roaming the streets, and ultimately, she serves to be a really fun side character and helps to create the sort of tension and drama this show needs. As well, we get a ton of remixes of different characters in Spider-Man's mythos, obviously alluding to the fact that this needed to be a Spider-Man show without all of Spider-Man's supporting cast. So we have a brand new Green Goblin who's a good guy. We have a new take on J. Jonah Jameson.
Mr. Minio, do you mind if I call you JJ?
What are you talking about?
We get remixes of tons of villains. It was the way the staff was trying to be creative and continue to give us true to Spider-Man stories while using these brand new characters, a lot of them invented because unfortunately, they didn't have the rights to a majority of Spider-Man's cast. Hell, they had to fight to get the rights to Venom and Carnage, and there's a reason Venom and Carnage only appear in as many episodes as they do. But they did a pretty good job at putting twists on these villains that we find so familiar. Take Vulture for example. He is usually an old buzzard that is stealing life force or just robbing people in general. Sometimes he's ticked at Norman Osborn for technology. But in this show, he is instead a disgruntled former upper class member of society who has had to see what it is for the lower class to live the way they do and wants to make a difference for them. Him and Green Goblin are stark good guys in this show, and it's pretty cool to see. As well, we get an interpretation of Electro that is downright insane. I mean, he is literally an electric eel with bipedal human features, and it's kind of wild to see. Again, part of the High Evolutionary and his animals are better genetic modifications, even though he strangely never modifies himself. I wonder why. And of course, this show is laden with amazing quips and funny moments, such as Peter turning in a photo shoot of him and Lady Vermin making out, which, again, the whole black cat kissing with the mask on thing is just so funny to me. As well, he also is full of these quips and quotables that are amazing. This version of Spider-Man never shuts up. Constant internal monologues, constant jokes.
Beautiful and smart.
And to think, I didn't know you cared.
Does a phenomenal job at doing that. And the voice acting is great, especially for a person that I don't really think of when I think Spider-Man, that being the voice of Rino Romano. This show also goes on to adapt like some of the more obscure Spider-Man lores, such as turning J. Jonah Jameson's son into a werewolf. Yes, they adapted this, and while Spectacular did it differently, this show really embraced the comic book craziness. Because they already had such large limitations to work with, you might as well adapt some of the crazier storylines in order to have a good time. And since I'm here and I've got your guys' attention, I want to talk about a few of my favorite episodes from the show. Both of these coming later in production and later in the series, as I feel like the crew started to really get a foothold for what they wanted the story to be, as again, they were writing this whole thing while producing it. And that's with after Jameson and his whole werewolf shtick, he gives Peter a data disc as a location. Geez, DVD disc. That really dates this show. Either way, the data disc has a way of finding the shuttle that Peter came here on, a way for him to get back to Mary Jane, something that he has expressed repeatedly. All he did was come here to save J. Jonah Jameson's son and nothing more. He didn't want to get involved with defeating the High Evolutionary. He didn't want to get involved with helping defeat a fascist government, and he wasn't really his thing. He just wanted to leave. But with great power comes great responsibility, and Spider-Man could not just abandon these people. And so when Green Goblin confronts him about going off and running home and not actually doing anything, and also finds out that he's Peter Parker because PD kind of sucks at keeping his secret identity, he ultimately is left with one choice, and that is either to help the people of the world, the failed mutations that have been enslaved by the High Evolutionary and are being used to make the mutagen that he uses to make his perfect creations, which are the better looking bipedal animals. I mean, I can't lie. These guys are nightmare inducing to look at, but it's not what's on the outside, it's what's on the inside. And I think the show is trying to help make that point. And the goal would be that Spider-Man can either fly himself home, or for whatever reason, he would have to use his only way home to blow up the facility and free all of these people. And if you know anything about Spider-Man, you know that the choice he's going to make is to save people. But there wasn't much of a choice. I said he only had one earlier, and that's because he couldn't even get to the ship to pilot it if he wanted to. It wasn't going to happen for him, unfortunately, and all he could do was best redirect the course of the ship into saving those people. And I like that at the end of the episode, he has a little internal monologue thinking about this and what he would have actually done. I like the idea that he's not an infallible version of Spider-Man and that he's human. At the end of the day, he would have done the right thing because he is Spider-Man, but it's interesting to hear him think otherwise.
The Goblin was wrong when he said I didn't really want to help those folks. But I wonder, if I could have gotten to the cockpit and piloted the ship, what would I really have done?
The next episode I really want to talk about is everything to do with the symbiotes. High Evolutionary wants to take a look at Venom and to experiment on the symbiote to help further his goals as being an evil dictator. And once the symbiote is subjected and separated from Eddie Brock, Brock starts dying. And we're treated to a few flashbacks which are eerily similar to the 90s show, but just different enough to be a new universe. I mean, down to the way Venom got the symbiote originally is just like in the 90s show, but Spider-Man picking it up is slightly different. It's a really good retelling, and it's quick and it's to the point, but it also helps to provide that this show absolutely nails the relationship between Peter and Eddie Brock, and I've got a clip that will do it more justice than me just saying it.
Let's get this straight, Brock. I like you even less than you like me. As far as I'm concerned, you should be locked in a trunk in a cell at the bottom of the ocean.
But I can't sit back and watch a man die. Not even you, Eddie.
And when I say the relationship of Peter and Brock, I am talking specifically about the classic comic book relation the two characters have, and not like the Spectacular Spider-Man or Ultimate Comics sort of brotherly love that the two characters seem to share. As well, this episode has a couple great homages. We get Black Suit Spider-Man, which I was beyond obsessed with as a kid and still love to this day. As well, we get a couple of cool fight scenes, but there is something that is fundamentally wrong about this episode that bugs me to no end. And that's the idea that the symbiote is fundamentally evil. It's fundamentally a truly evil hive mind, and it's nothing more than there to corrupt the person that wears it. I don't like that idea for the symbiotes. The symbiotes have evolved so far beyond that, but this was written in the 90s where the symbiote was kind of that, but at the same time it wasn't, because this is coming off the heels of Venom Lethal Protector, and in my opinion it makes no sense that the symbiote is still treated the same way that it is, as just being evil and mind controlling. But maybe that just works better for a kid's TV show because the nuance there is quite deep. And this whole fighting between both symbiotes and watching the two combine into a freakish, hellish monster that gave me nightmares as a kid leads to Spider-Man getting yelled at by Yamada Jones because he low-key repped her medical shop.
Spider-Man, do you know what you did?
Saved you?
Saved us. You practically destroyed the clinic. You're no better than those sicko symbiotes.
Yeah, I didn't really mention Yamato was a doctor, unless I said doctor earlier, which then this section is irrelevant, but yes, she's a doctor, and fortunately for all of us, she's there to help Peter clean his wounds, and she's also a struggling doctor, so really destroying her clinic like that was really messing with her bottom line. But all of that pales in comparison to the end of this show. Now, I felt like they did a really great job creating this 13-episode show right up until the finale, in my opinion. They've been making this show up as it goes down the line, and unfortunately for them, this show would absolutely be tanking in not only ratings and popularity, but also in toy sales. They probably were better off going with the $20.99 Spider-Man rather than this show. And that's why we end up leaving it on nothing more than a cliffhanger. You see, the High Evolutionary is once again scheming to kidnap everybody, transferring them into animals and take their DNA, specifically Spider-Man's. But this time he makes the crucial mistake of once again separating Eddie Brock from the symbiote, and when everybody escapes and defeats the High Evolutionary, there's some trouble afoot, because Eddie says once he was separated from the symbiote a second time, they had already created a prognosis in the hive mind that when that happens, they're going to explode all of the symbiote like spores that they've been building up throughout these last few weeks. And since him and Carnage were disconnected, the symbiote is just acting of its own accord and ultimately nukes the entire planet in symbiosis spores to basically turn everybody into those weird symbiote hive minds I showed earlier in this video. And that's it. That's the end of the show, because it never got a continuation, and that's because Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy really ramped up in being completed. This show was bad, and so of course they want to tie in with the movie that was receiving lots of critical praise, and that's how we ultimately ended up landing MTV's iteration of Spider-Man, which is beautiful in its own right. Again, this show suffers because it was not only forced to be original in its own thing and separated so much from the Spider-Man mythos, but it also suffers because it's sandwiched between three extraordinarily good Spider-Man adaptations. The 90s Spider-Man, then of course we have this show, but then after it we have MTV Spider-Man, which is phenomenal, and Spectacular Spider-Man, which some argue to be the best, right up there with 90s Spider-Man. It is absolutely insane what this show has to go up against in quality levels, and all of this because it was stripped bare bones by the people leading the projects via Rod. What? Who said that? But yes, it was ultimately a screw job, and this show was set up for failure. It's low-key insane, and yet, despite being set up for failure, they made what is arguably a pretty decent Spider-Man show. It's a little absurd, it's a little off the wall, it's very comic booky, but if you love comic book Spider-Man, give the show a watch. And also the suit is super dope. Alright, thank you all for watching. If you liked the video, please leave a like, it helps out the channel a lot. If you want to sub, that helps out the channel a ton too. You can always unsub later. And as well, if you want to support me further as a content creator, I do have a Patreon in which for $1 a month, you can see these videos early and unedited, so all the changes I have to make for the YouTube version don't get made over there. And as well, at the end of each and every one of my videos, I shout out my $5 and above Patreon tier members. So it's about time that I did that. So shout out Demetrius Youngblood, shout out Metal Monk, shout out West Belladonna, shout out Oscar, shout out McGann, shout out eSebert13, Gabriel LaFonte, Transgers1, Video Gamer 75, Golden Boy 420, Dakota Ross, and Donovan Gomez, and MC Bomb 27. Y'all are amazing. Hope y'all have an absolutely fantastic day.